There are so many wonderful forms of media out there, but so little time to invest. That is where the Fear Missing Out podcast comes in. FOMO aims to help listeners get over their fear by asking guests within the Columbia community about the entertainment they enjoy, getting at what they love the most about them, and where newcomers can get started. I'm Isaiah Colbert, and this week I'm joined by Jonah Okudo. Stay tuned as we talk about Warhammer. All right, let's get started. All right, so it's been a while. It's been probably a March since we've last sort of chatted, and if I do recall, we've kind of had like a lot of things in common, from like whether fighting about like, oh, which one of us loves The Witcher more, or who's best at Tetris. So there's been a lot of things that we've like kind of had a commonality on, like being into a lot of stuff.
100%.
But I remember there was like one thing that you mentioned to me, that you said that you were like really into, like you maybe dropped it like during like a meeting or like downtime, like at the desk. You mentioned your love for Warhammer, and Warhammer. Just in preparation for the stream, I remember I was talking to you, and I mistaked it for Warframe. There's a lot of war things. So
two very different things.
Yeah, very different things. I getting ahead of myself. Very excited for this podcast. Let's introduce yourself, Jonah. Let the people know who you are, what you do.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Jonah Okudo. I'm the multimedia producer at the Chronicle, and then outside of that, I'm a BFA directing student at Columbia. So I'm super into film. I'm super nerdy, love all that stuff. I'm a big gamer, obviously, like watch a lot of movies. I could talk a little bit about what you're mentioning. I think it was at a meeting where I dropped it because I got into it. Like, so, when quarantine hit, I was looking for a new hobby. And one of the things I'd always wanted to get into, but never did, was like these little miniatures, like these fantasy miniatures that I'd always seen around because my dad was like a big, like he would build Gundams and like model cars and stuff. So we had a ton of these lying around. And I played with them a little bit as a kid, but I never super got into it. And then quarantine hit, and I was like looking for something to take up my time. And I said, dude, this is the moment. And so I got into painting these little Warhammer figures, and I love them.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I was gonna ask, like, definitely for the uninitiated, because when I did like a little quick cursory little clip search about Warhammer, I was a little bit confused because, like, okay, so you like mentioned there were figurines, but I'm seeing like a whole like Warhammer like video game and stuff
Oh
like that.
yeah, dude.
There seems to be a lot of types of
No, yeah,
stuff
it's
that's going
massive.
on with Warhammer. So can you, for the uninitiated, can you sort of explain the lowdown of like what
Yeah.
Warhammer is?
Yeah, I'll give some spark notes. So, all right, so this I'm gonna preface this by saying, like, I'm a relative newbie to Warhammer. Like, I've been familiar with the series for a while, but I'm not super in depth with it compared to like some people. I believe it started in either the 70s or the 80s. This British company named Games Workshop. Essentially, it came from like a D&D campaign that the owners of that company had, and they had made their own universe, the Warhammer universe, right? And from that spawned these two different lines of figures and stories. Warhammer, there are books for it. The main things is that it's like a tabletop war game, and so you get a giant table, and you lay this mat out, and you have physical terrain that's either casted out of resin, or a lot of people do this thing called like kit bashing, where they make their own terrain, right? And then you paint it up and you make it look real good, and you play the game with the maps that you design. And then so you have these figures that represent, different components of your army. So there's like legendary heroes, and there's like infantry, there's like spellcasters and all this stuff. And you have to paint those figures yourself because they come just casted in resin. So it started off with that board game, and then from there spawned an entire line of, again, like literature, like books on books on books. There's like literally thousands of years of lore in Warhammer, like 40,000 years of lore to be more precise. And then on top of that, there's video games. Like Vermintide and Vermintide 2, I think, are my favorite Warhammer video games. I play those a ton, but there's other stuff as well. And I think the biggest thing for people to know about Warhammer is that there's two different like timelines. It's not like timelines, but there's two different versions of it. Warhammer 40K or 40,000 is like grim, dark sci-fi fantasy. Like if you look up Space Marine, probably the first thing you're gonna see is gonna be a Warhammer thing. If you ever played StarCraft and like the Terran and StarCraft, like their armor was inspired by those Space Marines, just these big hulking dudes. And so there's a whole, story and stuff like that goes with 40K. And then there was originally Warhammer Fantasy. And around sometime relatively recently, they changed it, and now it's called Warhammer Age of Sigmar, which is like your classical like high fantasy with mages and stuff like that. And it's a lot lighter, it's a lot dinkier. But each of those lines are different games, and they each have like different figures and different rule sets. And again, like there's books and video games for each of those.
Okay, like I feel a little cheated because you kinda hyped yourself up as like a little bit of a filthy casual, but like now you're like, no, 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 no. Here's a whole extended universe of stuff. So I wanted to ask you because like definitely that's very interesting that they like started off from like a D&D thing and it just
Yeah,
branched out
yeah.
into all this different stuff. But like that can be a little daunting for the whole
Oh yeah,
Warhammer like
100%.
cinematic universe, if you will, for like
No,
different
yeah,
things to
for
get
real.
into. I guess to get started talking about that, what sort of put you on? Because I know that you mentioned
Yeah,
that
yeah,
your
yeah.
dad sort of had like an interest in that. So like,
Yeah.
how did you come across it?
Yeah, for sure. Like, so, my dad was always a modeler. Like, when I was a kid, I loved building Gundam kits, and I still like gunplay kits, and I still build gunplay kits all the time. Like if you come to my apartment, like there's Gundams on the wall, and they're like posing with their rifles or whatever. Um, and so like we were always into that, but the Warhammer stuff was always intimidating because I've never been like a talented visual artist. Like I can't draw. You know what I mean? So I was like, man, the painting just seems so hard because these things are really tiny. They're really really tiny minis. Um, but yeah, quarantine hit, and I was playing a lot of the video game Vermintide 2, which is like a Left 4 Dead type game, but it's set in the Warhammer universe. So you play as these heroes, um, and you fight against these rat people, um, who like they make up the Vermintide, and they're like these just crazy, disgusting rat creatures, and there's like hordes of them, and you fight them, and it's badass. I was like, dude, this is so cool. Um, and I have a buddy named Jack who was like into Warhammer. He was much more into the lore than I was, and still to this day, he's much more into the lore. But we started talking. We were like, dude, like we got to try this. And then so we went to a Warhammer like Games Workshop store because they have their own stores where they sell everything. And we just bought a bunch of models, and we were like, whatever, let's do it. So we started painting them together, and ever since then, it's just been like my go-to hobby. I fell in love with it super quick. But I
All
definitely
right, all
got
right.
into it like from the video game side of things, I would say.
Okay. How many Warhammer figurines would you say you have right now?
Yeah. Well, see, now here's the thing. I don't actually play the tabletop game. I want to, but
Mm-mm.
it's hard to get into because like you need a giant table, and I mean the rule books are literally like 80 pages long. Like
Oh, okay.
you need people that know how to play it, or you need to go to like an event or something. Um and so I don't paint armies. I'm much more into painting for display versus
Mm.
painting to play the game. Because you're planning to play the game, like you can make them look pretty good, and like that's it, right? Like you can't play with an unpainted miniature. Um, but for me, like I really love spending a lot of time on one model and getting it going. But I think right now I have like 10 that I've done. And again, I just started since quarantine, so it's not that many, but it's they take a surprising amount of time, I would say. And I've been testing out new techniques and stuff like that with them, but only like 10, I would say.
Okay, okay. So
Hmm.
like you're more would it be accurate to say you're more of a collector of it than like
Yeah. Oh,
deep
100%.
down nitty gritty? Okay, okay.
No, 100%. Yeah.
All right. So more of like a general Grievous, like a fine addition to your collection of like
Yeah.
Warhammer like
Yeah.
figurines. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm always hunting for that perfect mini, dude. Like I go on the website like 3 times a week, just like looking for the right one. You know what I mean? I mean, there's thousands of them.
Mm-mm. And so you mentioned that you and your friend would like go to like a store to like collect some of the stuff. What is
Mhm.
there like any like stores or like in like the Chicagoland area that you like kind of scope out for
Yeah.
to
Let's
like get
see.
like the most of it?
Yeah. Well, you can buy a lot of them at comic shops. I think Graham
Mm,
Cracker Comics. I think there's a Graham Cracker Comics in the Chicago, in the city. But I don't think Games Workshop has any areas in the city. They have one of the suburbs that we would go to in Downers Grove, which is about like an hour away if you take the metro. And there's like a little downtown Downers Grove area that has a store in there. But most of so like the Warhammer models are like low key like hella expensive. Like
mm-mm.
for what is essentially plastic. Like the cost is really freaking high, for good reason. The casts are really good. But that's why I get most of them off of eBay or like secondhand. You buy them, you can usually get them for much cheaper. So I do like a lot of browsing online and then mostly buy stuff off of eBay. But it takes a little bit more time because like obviously the stores have everything you could ever want.
Okay. And
Yeah.
is there anything for people who would like to jump into like Warhammer stuff? Is there anything to kind of like look out for or like worry about? Or is there like any fear of like any
Yeah.
scalpers or anything out there? Or like
Yeah, I
what's the
hear you.
scene like there?
Yeah, I would say I don't it's like Warhammer is really intimidating, I think, to get into, because there's so many different like avenues like of where you can start. I think if you're like, I'm definitely, I'm like a gamer till I die. And so for me, like playing Vermintide, Vermintide 2 specifically was like the way I got into the universe the most. Just because like, like if you like Left 4 Dead, you're gonna love that game. It's got like crunchy combat and like you're just fighting off hordes of these like demonic rat people, and it's like incredible. Um, so I would definitely say, like, if you want to get into Warhammer, I would actually recommend maybe not starting with the painting. If you're not, if again, if you're like me and you're like a little bit nervous about like the visual art aspect of it. Um, but if you want to go straight into the painting, and like I recommend people do, because even if you're like a visual artist, or like even if you can't draw, like it's just such a blast to actually go through and paint these things, and like it's almost meditative. Um, but I would recommend, Games Workshop sells these start collecting kits, which are like really well priced. They're like $70 for like 15 models, and usually 15 models would cost you like, double that.
Mm.
And you can get some really nice stuff there. And then some of those come with like paints, and some of them come with brushes and a plastic palette or whatever it is, and you can get what you need. The one thing I would, it's super addicting, and I think with Warhammer, a lot of people are going to try to get you to, buy like the newest, latest, like highest grade brushes, and like
The
they're going to want.
upselling, is the
No,
upselling very strong,
yeah,
or?
like, yeah, I think it's like that, but also, like, once you start to read about it and you're like, "Oh, well, these painters use this, and this painter uses this, and I need to get, like, a fine sable brush, and I need to get a wet palette, and I need to do all these different little accessories." Like, don't fall for that, like, get a pack of, like, shitty nylon brushes off of Amazon, get a plastic palette, and, like, learn the hard way. And, I guess if I had to give one piece of advice, like, it always looks bad at first, dude. The models always look like garbage, but you just keep putting on paint until it looks good.
Okay. And like I
Yeah.
know that you mentioned that you're like sort of just new to this, and you said that you aren't like really creatively like sort of like attuned to
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the sort of arts and crafts kind of side of things. But obviously if you're like this much into it, I'd say that there is a level of like proficiency that you've like displayed here for it. So
Oh,
what can you run us through like a kind of what does like sort of getting started with like doing like
yeah,
the
like, what
art
does it
for a
look like?
Warhammer? Like, well, yeah, what's the setup
Yeah.
for that all like?
Yeah, well, so this is what I do. And so everybody has their own process, and that's what's so beautiful about like the painting. So as soon as I got into it, I got obsessed with watching like YouTube videos and like different channels that focus on paint. Like Miniac is a great one for people that want to get into it. Squidmar, stuff like that. Um, Dana Howell is my favorite painter. She's like this awesome super. She like came from a traditional. She like went to Cal Arts for animation, and so she has this awesome poppy kind of cartoony style that she paints stuff in. Like she does like vaporwave themes and stuff like that, just really beautiful stuff. Um, but like the process for me that I got into and that I'm kind of testing out now, um, I have a set of pretty decent brushes that I got off of Amazon. I use a wet palette. A wet palette is essentially like it's a palette that allows your paints to stay moist like for like weeks on end, so you don't have to keep placing more paint on the palette. So like your paint lasts longer, and you can also mix easier on it. Because that's like a big thing is like you're not going to want to buy 6 different shades of blue if you can just buy blue and black and then mix your own, right? So you
Hmm.
can save money that way. But yeah, like I find my models right now. I can give you an example. I just finished building and assembling all of the start collecting box for this group of goblins, this goblin faction called the Gloom Spite Gits. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about these guys. They're hilarious. The Gloom Spite Gits
Okay, okay.
is a faction of goblins who, like, literally what they do all day and all night is they just get absolutely toked on these psychedelic mushrooms, and they come out of their cave and they worship this entity called the Bad Moon. Okay,
Okay,
and
all
the
right.
Bad Moon is believed to be the reincarnation or a manifestation of the orc and goblin god named Gorkamorka. Okay,
Oh,
Gorka.
that's a hell of a name.
I no, and listen to this, dude. Okay, Gorka. Hold on, I'm looking this up because I don't want to get it. I don't want to get it wrong.
Oh yeah, no,
I believe
don't
it.
want to be called a fake fan for this
No,
one.
like legitimately, people will like try to murder me if I get this stuff wrong. The Warhammer, they're like so full of it. It's like Gorka is seen as like I think it's like he's ferociously cunning, and then Morka, the other side, is like cunningly ferocious, right? Which like
Mm,
mean the same exact thing, and so they're just one entity, but they believe they're two separate things. Okay, this is a funny thing about goblins and orcs in Warhammer, is that they're just genuinely so stupid, right? But they're
mm,
one of the only beings in the Warhammer universe that actually has any magical powers. And for the orcs, their magical powers are that if they believe something enough, no matter how stupid or baseless it is, it becomes true. But they're too dumb to recognize that they have this power. And so in 40K, orcs believe that if you paint something the color red, it goes faster. And they believe it with such
Wow,
tenacity
wow.
and such sincerity that they actually go like cars go faster. Okay. All this crazy stuff. But anyways, these goblins worship the Bad Moon, who's an emissary of Gorkamorka, and they want to usher the world in eternal darkness. And so they get toked on these mushrooms, and then they run out and they just like murder people in their sleep. And they fight with these like little kind of like demon dog creatures named Squigs, which are these really funny guys. And they got like trolls, and they all got mushrooms on them and stuff. It's super funny. And so I just finished
Mm.
assembling all those dudes. And I primed them up, and I finished underpainting them. And underpainting is like what I've been doing recently, which is a technique where, like before you start throwing on color, you highlight it, right? So you get all the different shades. Because then what you do after is you take your paint and you can mix it with what's called glaze medium, and you glaze the color over what's already shadowed, right? So you don't have to shade it with different paints,
Okay.
which gets you like a pretty nice look, and you get it pretty quickly. And so that's pretty much like what the process is. You build them. You have to like paint. You have to build them, and you have to like glue them together with plastic cement or whatever. And then after you cut the pieces out of these sprues, and so you have to like clean the pieces up and like scrape them and file them down. It depends on how in depth you want to go with it. Um, and then you highlight them, right? So you like get your bright spots and your really deep shadows. And after that, you can start glazing on color and blending if you want to get gradients. And after you get a base coat on, you maybe shade with some washes, which are like a really watery paint, or then you start highlighting and you're making things pop. And eventually, like you add paint on, and you watch the model transform, and eventually you're like, you know what, I'm done. It's
Oh,
good.
like
Yeah,
you're really sounding like the Bob Ross of the Warhammer
dude, you gotta
Warhammer
be.
things.
And it's like it actually is a little bit Bob Rossy, I think. Just like really focus on one
Butchering,
thing
yeah,
at a
no, no.
time. Yeah.
All the stuff. I know that they're sound a lot reminiscent, and it's probably like sacrilege probably for me saying this, but it sounds a lot of reminiscent of like the World of like Warcraft kind of stuff where there's
Oh
like
yeah, yeah,
factions of different
yeah.
creatures. So what kind of creatures are involved with
Yeah, well, it's
Warhammer?
funny you say that because WoW was super inspired. I have the website up. I can just read off some of these factions that I know. Do you want to hear about the sci-fi stuff or the fantasy stuff?
All right,
Let's do it.
I-fi.
Let's
So
do
let's
it.
hear about
So the
that.
sci-fi stuff is much darker than what Warhammer 40K is like. The genre for it is grim dark, which is just
Okay.
like chill because it's dark in a good way.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like it's nice. Um, so like Space Marines are like your go-to. That's what most people are going to start with. Again, like these just they're these superhuman dudes, 8 feet tall, clad in this iron armor, and they have these heavy bolters and like flamers, which are like flamethrowers. And they, some of these guys have chain swords, which are like little swords that have chainsaw blades on them, and they go, and they chop into people. It's awesome. Okay. And there's
Mhm.
different factions within the Space Marines. So there's different chapters, right? You have like the Raven Guard, Space Wolves, which are like these awesome Arctic guys that wear wolf pelts and they have like claws and stuff. Ultramarines are like your Mary Sue type characters. Dark Angel, there's a bunch of different factions. There's also like
Mm,
Death Watch, and Death Watch are like the elite Space Marines whose only goal is to exterminate Xenos, like aliens. Um,
mm,
then there's also the Inquisition, which is kind of an interest. I don't know too much about them, but they have sub factions in there. They're like religious zealots.
mm,
Religion is like a huge thing for 40K. There are these, there's a faction called the Adeptus Mechanicus, which are these people that have become so augmented that they're barely human anymore, but they worship technology as God, right? And in
mm.
the 40K universe, the universe is in a technological dark age. So only the Adeptus Mechanicus and some select few other groups have access to this technology. And there's like tech priests, which are all geared out and they like worship the machine god, stuff like that. Super, super cool. Um, there's like the Sisters of Battle, which is this badass like all female group of elite warriors, who like they're basically like space Catholics and they just like destroy
Okay.
everybody. There's demons, right? There's like chaos demons, and there's all these different demon gods. Korn, who's like the skull god. Um, there's like Senech and a bunch of other ones. And then let's see. Obviously, there's space orcs, dude. Everybody loves the orcs. The orcs' goal is to bring about this thing called the Great, like Wah is what it's called, like
The
W
Great
A
Paw.
A A A A
Okay.
G H.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just a scream, which is essentially they just want to destroy the world. That's like their goal. They're chaos people. Um,
Okay.
Tyranids were inspired by Alien, so they just look like xenomorphs, pretty much.
Okay.
Um, or like the Zerg, the Zerg from StarCraft, they came from Tyranids.
Mm-mm.
They look just like that. There's also
Okay.
an elf race called the Eldar, right? And they're like space elves. They're pretty cool. I don't know too much about them. They're okay. There's
Are
also
they
the
like snobby like elves are kind of
oh yeah.
always kind of like typecasted? Okay, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
no, yeah, they're like posh, and they're like I mean, religion plays such a key role in like all the different factions. But they're like definitely elitist, and they're like
Okay.
yeah, they're like they're very elegant. Like if you look at the designs of the models, they're very very elegant. There's also the
Okay.
Tau. The Tau is interesting. The Tau's whole thing is like they um they do everything for quote unquote the greater good, right? But then it's like, what does the
Mm.
greater good mean? But they're
The
cool
the
because
the morally
right,
gray characters. Okay,
right.
gotcha.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, they're very much so like, yeah, there's a different couple ways you could read them, but yeah, they're
Mm.
very like morally driven. But they're kind of cool because they fight with mechs like Gundam looking things, which is like I don't know,
Okay.
I'm into it. I think it's pretty sweet.
All
But
right.
yeah,
Out of all these like
I know
gaggle
it's
of
like a million.
characters, yeah, yeah. There's a whole extended universe of them. So out of all these characters, so which one are you like more air quote kin to? Like which ones
Yeah,
are
yeah.
like your favorite out of all of them?
Dude, yeah, it's hard to pick, man. Like, for me, I think the Sisters of Battle are so badass.
Mm.
Um, they're definitely up there just because like they're so cool. Their tanks have like organs on them, and they have these little flying babies with skull heads and flying. It's all this crazy stuff. So if
It's
I had to pick,
sounding like a space like Amazonian type like Mad Max kind of a thing from how you're describing
yeah,
it.
yeah. No, dude, it's like similar, dude. They're just like badass, man. I would probably for 40K, I would pick Sisters of Battle. If I had to pick
Okay.
for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, I would probably pick I'd probably pick Night Haunt, which are like these spirits and skeletons. Just because I love that stuff. Like anything
Okay.
gothic, I love.
Gotcha. So
Yeah,
I know that you mentioned a little bit earlier that especially when we were like kind of retreading like a little bit of the lore and aspects of Warframe Warhammer. Oh God, I did
Warhammer.
that again. All right.
Good
Oh
job.
no. This does perfectly segue into the next thing I was going to ask you about. So you mentioned that the fandom would come for you
Oh,
or me
100%.
specifically for completely butchering that and mistaking it for Warframe. So
Yeah.
what's the fandom like? Because I know that for a lot of people who
Oh
want to
yeah.
jump into a thing, they might be like a little wary to jump
Yeah.
in because the fandom might like sort of like be a little bit of a scary place to get
No,
into.
100%. Yeah, no, I hear that. I think the Warhammer community is it's like it's welcoming to new people. Like if you ever go to a store and you're like, I don't know what
Well,
any
not
of this
not
is.
recently, but yeah,
Okay, yeah, not okay. Hear me out.
yeah.
Unless you're somewhere safe. But yeah, like post COVID, if you go into a store and you're like, I heard about this, on the FOMO podcast, which is gonna have a million views by then.
Mm-mm.
And I want to get into it. Like the people there are gonna be like, oh hell yeah, like hop on it. And they'll teach you everything. So people are really welcoming. I think in person, I think online is a little bit trickier.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of infighting, I think. Like, people it's like Warhammer is like a lifestyle for a lot of people.
Mm.
Like this is their thing. It's like they work and then when they have time, they play Warhammer with their buddies or like they go to tournaments. Or like if they're painters, they'll like paint and go to painting tournaments, or competitions rather. So online it's a little bit trickier. But there's like subreddits and stuff like that are pretty open. But, like, I feel that because that's what really kind of, like, scared me about it at first is I was like, "Dude, I don't wanna, like, paint something garbage and, like, have people see it and, like, all that
Mm.
stuff." Um, but, like, I would recommend just, like, accept it as your own thing, you know what I mean? Like, do it for you and, don't let other whatever. You paint, maybe your first models are gonna be bad, but they'll get better as time goes?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else that people should sort of look out for, like any tips and tricks that you can offer the people, the audio listeners
Yeah.
about Warhammer?
Let me think. I don't know. Like it depends on what you want to do. If you want to go into the gaming side of things and you want to play the game, which eventually I'm going to get into, but I really just like the painting the most. I recommend getting a start collecting kit. Like, what's cool about Warhammer is that each of these factions have literally like 150-page books of lore,
Mm.
and also it has all the rules for how to play them. But it's got all this awesome lore and art and like short stories in there that you can read, and you can find a lot of those online. So I would recommend looking. They're called battle tomes. It's like if you go on the
Mm.
Games Workshop and you're like, "Oh, dude, who are the Sylvaneth? Like they look pretty cool. They're like crazy looking tree people." You can look up their battle tome and read all about them. And if they're for you, get the start collecting kit, get a couple models, whatever, and get some paints and just go for it. There's tons of resources online, like YouTube. You can learn everything off of YouTube. That I highly, highly recommend. But yeah, I mean, I recommend it to everybody. I think it's like so relaxing, and for like COVID especially, where you're inside and you kind of just want to zone out. It makes the time go by fast, which is great for me because sometimes it's tough to get through the days.
Mm,
And I think it's like tremendously helped my COVID experience. Like if I didn't have it, I think things would have been much, much more difficult.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'd say that's been a podcast. So where can the lovely audio listeners find you out in the digital world?
Oh,
Plug
yeah.
yourself. This is the part where you plug yourself.
All right. Well, first thing I'll say is, I happen to be working on what I consider to be one half of my thesis project at Columbia. I'm directing a short film called Georgia Peach. You can donate to that, or you can send me messages about how good it's going to be. There's a link in my bio on Instagram. My Instagram is at Ocutor, Ocutor, just my last name with my middle initial. And then on Twitter, I'm at JOQdo, where I post a lot of dumb stuff, and we get into a lot of arguments on Twitter, Isaiah, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Many
I
hot
think
takes.
I I think I it's funny because 'cause we're, like, similar in so many ways, but then we have these, like, minute differences, but I feel like we both take those minute differences, like, pretty seriously. You know what I mean?
Mm-mm.
But yeah,
We have a reputation to uphold.
no, that's what I'm saying, dude. It's all love, though. It's 100% all love. But yeah, you guys can find me there. I guess the only thing I can plug is my movie, but I really appreciate you having me on the podcast, dude. Anytime I can
Yeah.
talk about Warhammer and myself, I love it.
Yeah, no problem. This feels like a proper baton pass from you running things at Culture Conversations to me trying to sort of spearhead this
Oh
little
no,
thing of a podcast idea.
if there's anybody to do it, man, 100% it's you. You got what it takes. You're doing a
Oh,
great job
thank you.
already.
Thank you very much. All right, so this is the part where I come up with a cool, neat tagline here. Totally off script here. I worked on this a little bit before this. So,
Go for
all
it, save
right,
it.
so that's been the FOMO Pod Show podcast. I'd say that was a fear quelled and a curiosity satiated. So, now you guys know a little bit more than zero about Warhammer. See you guys next time.
Nice one, dude.
Yeah.